Hi, I'm Mikey, and this is Tyler, and we're the founders of Innovative Start Organization, also known as ISO. And our nonprofit teaches financial literacy. And in these podcasts, we like to tackle financial topics, economic topics, and how that relates to you as our viewer. Um, we usually do about three topics, just discussing overall trends, news that's come out, just things to like look out for or forward to. So today we're going to hit on a few things. Usually a lot of trends have been around some AI stuff, so we're going to talk about that, especially some of the shifts that we've seen. I think what happened with AI is that there's been a lot of hype behind it, but there has also been a lot of studies that have shown how much it is actually impacting the job force and people's daily work lives. A lot of people, if it's not that their job has been completely replaced by AI, they use it as a tool, but also study shows that having it as a tool has not changed, I guess, work production in a sense. We'll also talk about the American dream redefinition, especially for some of those entering, I guess, wanting to buy a house or what that looks like, or people still on the housing market. But first, we'll touch on some of the interest rates. I think it's been a while since we've recorded, but there is a new Fed chair. So, just on what that looks like, some things to just think about, so forth and so on. So, we'll jump into the interest rates. So, at the start of the year, uh, when the old Fed chair was in, we saw that interest rates were basically held stable, just where they were. There was no cuts. Just everything was like a look and feel. There was no extreme actions taken or even like minor actions taken because I guess over there in the Federal Reserve, they wanted to just see how things were playing out and didn't want to make any drastic changes that may or may not shift because there were a lot of things that were going on at that time and ongoing similarly that they couldn't make any decisions to say, hey, this is why we can justify a cut or raise because essentially we don't know how some of these economic factors are going to play out, whether that was the current war or I guess lack thereof that was happening impacting oil, shifts with AI and things like that in the job market. There's a lot of stuff that the Federal Reserve essentially has to take into account. One thing I would like to say too is I feel like we've never really mentioned or touched on it, but any decision that's made is not solely up to the Fed chair, but usually it, I guess, uses direction of the board, so forth and so on, to help make those decisions. So, just like any position, CEO or whatever, most decisions are not made on the sole person, but mostly a group of people. So, with that being said, some things that might impact as far as like where federal interest rates are and if there's going to be a cut or not. We're looking at some things like your loans, especially car loans, student loans, things that are, like I said, anything that's federally tied. These are some things that you're going to see some impact on if there was to be a raise. I don't think there will be any cuts anytime soon. I think, as far as like, if I remember, Tyler, the current administration was looking for deeper cuts, right, on the federal interest rates.
There, the president is a big real estate person, right? So real
Mhm.
estate thrives off lower rates. So it's going to be interesting to say the least. And it's just been back and forth on Kevin Walsh and what he said. Pronounce his last name. Uh, so I'm curious what's going to happen. Also, I think you mentioned this oil, like the inflation report came out. What was that? I think that was yesterday morning,
Mhm.
or that was this morning. Uh, so that was up higher as well. So these all things affect the markets and it doesn't help with this war situation. Has been back and forth.
I'd also say related but unrelated is pay attention to the current ongoing, I guess, I don't even know how you would say it or words for it, but student loans as far as what they're trying to do with the repayments, student loan forgiveness, some of the changes for students currently getting ready to go to college as we're in the summer period now, and we roll around to people getting federal loans, just making sure that you're paying attention to all these things because if you're someone who is going through that process now, everything that is being done the Department of Education, it should be extremely important to you right now. And if you are a current loan owner, some of the decisions that they're making, especially if you're someone that works in the required space for PLSF, which is part of the student loan forgiveness program. But if you are part of that, that's something that you should pay attention to because they're making some pretty important decisions. I think most of like I said, the key takeaway with that is, and he's not, the current Fed chair is not planning on making any deep cuts yet. He's holding steady. So I don't think if there was an assumption that there would be a change, considering that the president picks the Fed chair and maybe there's influence there. But again, it's not the sole decision of the Fed chair. It's more so up to the board within the Federal Reserve, and then final decision comes from his mouth. So um, I would say just make sure you're paying attention to that. Anything that, like I said, is tied, please pay attention. We've talked about this a lot of times in episodes, but it's a great deal to have a deep understanding of how federal interest rates shape other economic factors. Jumping out of that into the next topic, just what the American dream means, what it used to mean, the shift that we've seen for some of the younger adults, and maybe even just the future generation. What does that look like for people? I would say, as far as personal attest, the shift has been there. I do know a lot of people, and Ty specifically, who have gotten or bought homes or have closed out on home or things like that. And it just really just depends on what your goals are, what your personal um, goals are, and things like that. But and also with that, considering what your goals may be, but where you are currently as far as financial stability. So what we've seen as far as like what this study shows is that 69% of Gen Z adults view owning a business as a central part of their American dream. One thing we want to talk about as far as like entrepreneurship, obviously with the shift of AI and job security and just a lot of just things that have happened in the job market in general, a lot of people are shifting towards the fact of just owning a business. There's a lot of resources, and obviously with AI for personal use, um, there's a lot more you can get answers for, and or just like get your feet into it without having to need an advisor, without needing to go through another person to get to where you need to be. I do think that there will be like a great shift as far as like where a lot of industries or like where a lot of people work at as far as like what industry they're in, especially because if it was something that was heavily impacted by AI, we'll see a trend over the next 5 to 10 years if those industries still exist with actual human beings in it. There was also a study that I seen recently that showed jobs that were more in a corporate sense were heavily impacted by AI versus those that have more personable, I guess, connections or just like use of people are most stable. So like think nurses, doctors, firefighters, so forth and so on. But I'll pass it over to you, Ty, as far as like what you've seen personally as a shift. Any thoughts on some of the statistics that we have here in our notes? But
Yeah, and we're getting some of this from Wells Fargo's 2026 money study for those that are interested in the source. I think it's interesting. I think our generation and younger are starting to question the corporate route, or like the typical university straight to corporate. Uh, and I think part of that could probably be because like AI, maybe a shift more towards the trades, and that's less corporate. I don't know. It is interesting to say the least. And I think there's a big push right now for people to question like, what does it look like to work and then retirement? Our parents and our grandparents worked at jobs for what 20, 30 years and would retire there, and that's like unheard of nowadays. So in my opinion, I think that this all somewhat ties together. It is really interesting. But like the entrepreneurship boom specifically from this article, it does take a lot of risk. Like being your own boss is not easy. Like you don't get PTO, you're on call depending on what business you're in. You have to pay for your own health insurance. Like you don't get health insurance like as cheaply, I guess, for lack of better words, as you would from a corporate job. It's like there's all these things to be thinking about. But where there's higher risk, there is higher reward. So It's all what life you want. You could have a good life living out of the city, and it's cheaper, and you don't have to make as much money versus living more in an inner city. And again, I think it comes down to what the type of life you want as well to live. We're thinking about these jobs and stuff like that.
And also, just to add on that, the increase in entrepreneurship means that we'll have new innovation in certain things as people shift their mindset to find ways to be more innovative, find ways to make more tasks efficient. Um, and there also be an influx in things that have already been built out, but there's space for a young entrepreneur to grow into. Um, and those are the things that will give you like a head start, right? Trade school essentially is in that same sense. A lot of people who probably do a trade, your apprenticeship, work for a little bit or whatever, will probably want to open up their own business. Those are things that lead into that. So for our younger audience, those who are in college currently, either getting back into it, just figuring out one, just watch trends. Again, I think we've said this before, but bls.gov is a good resource just to see like what some of these jobs are, their outlook, what do you need in order to do such a job. That's extremely important. You could get a lot of your questions answered there. I would say overall, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you see. I think also too, like I'm not sure if it's been defined, but a lot of younger kids essentially go the influencer route, which is technically probably a subset of entrepreneurship. So I think that's probably where there's a lot of numbers are coming from that. But I would say overall, like it's a good thing to see that people are trying to be proactive. Some if one thing doesn't work out, you always have something there, and that's the good thing about entrepreneurship. You can have your all in, or it could be something that you're doing on the side, and then it becomes your all in. That's the key like factor into what entrepreneurship means to me, and then also what it could also mean to you. So, and then kind of next like shift into what we want to talk about, especially like I said with the job market and AI trends, especially since studies have been a little bit more concrete. I think we've really only been a year and a half with the AI shift, especially taking off and replacing jobs. But with that also comes what are the caveats of adding AI to the workforce? Has there been any? Because in reality, right, you get into your boardroom and they say we're bleeding in the sense of our costs are pretty high. We have people. We're not producing what we thought we would with the workforce that we have. Is there ways that we could shift cost? What people don't understand is that there is a cost to using AI. It's not just free. These businesses have to get enterprise plans, which costs a lot of money. And depending on how many they want, unlimited calls or essentially token usage, those come at like a rate, essentially. So there's been studies too out there where people have been like accidentally overused their rates and the bill comes in high, but it's not cheap. And studies have shown that if the trade-off is iffy because if you're completely taking somebody out, what is the cost of replacing that person, and then what's the output? There isn't any AGI yet that is especially for public use. I'll say that specifically because I'm pretty sure there's a government sector out there that has it, but there's any personal use, especially at the business or corporate level. So you still need somebody to one, use it, check it, make sure it's correct. It may cause more efficiency because it's building stuff quicker, but the amount of, I guess, learning and everything else also comes into play, and implementation, usage also comes into play. So I'm sure they weigh out the costs when they make these cuts. Obviously, if you've been paying attention, you can go to any Google resource, LinkedIn, and somebody would probably have something as far as like all of the big corporate giants and how much they've laid off their workforce. But so the reality shift, especially just also check your sectors. Like certain industries are, as I was saying earlier, more impacted by AI. If your interests align with something in that corporate sense or something that has potentially a high impact, most of the time you can still make it in that sector or that industry because maybe their goal isn't to replace people with it, but to essentially use it as a resource. And that's the best type of area or business you want to be in because you can also develop your skills on top of that. But I know to my only caveat with AI is that I think people learn less instead of it being a resource to make things more efficient. I think people are just using it as like a this is my answer and it's never checked or whatever. Hallucination with an AI is real. So don't solely rely or quote it as a source at any time it gives you something. Verify whatever it says and things like that because it could also pull from biased sources or whatever. It just uses the internet and what it's been trained on. So the stock market rally has been entirely dominated by that. A lot of like stocks you see, especially like stocks that are tech heavy, if it's an ETF, you would see that a lot of their holdings are in those industries or those tickers who have a lot of AI investment. That's where we have the AI bubble come into play. I think we've also talked about that a little bit too. With AI, the revenue or I guess profit that you're getting is iffy in the sense that the data centers and the costs and everything else to run the AI or whatever model or whatever it is pretty high and significant. On top of that, you have your workforce and everything else, right? And we're talking about the AI companies who are providing it. And then you have people who are supposed to basically invest but also cover the bill. I think there's a lot of overlap and I don't think there's any separation or like segregation of what feels legal in my head. But Tyler, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. There's just a lot going on. We lived through the crypto boom. Now we got another boom. I like how long can this go on for? I hate to be that guy. I don't know. It's really interesting. But Micron reported earnings after hours yesterday, and they popped like 9%
Popped.
overnight. So
Saw that.
like, it's. I'm not saying I don't know enough about some of this. I will say, so I'll say that caveat. But from an outside perspective, like, and seeing how things go, we are building a lot of infrastructure for this. My thing is like, how much are companies as the year goes on? We go into next year. How much of these companies are willing to pay for the AI usage because how expensive it's getting? I'm sure you've seen those articles. Like companies are wishing they didn't let go of some of their workers because the AI usage costs more than the workers did.
Hmm.
It's just interesting.
I
That's all I
think
got.
I think overall it really just depends. I would say like it should be a resource. These companies, especially it depends on like who's using it because I couldn't say either or. If it's somebody on the older side that runs the company versus the younger side, I feel like there's answers for both on why they may feel like AI replaces everything else. Um, because somebody on the older side might just be looking from a financial perspective, while somebody on the younger side can be looking at a use case perspective. By that is like if I'm somebody older, I'm probably just looking at numbers and I'm saying, okay, well, getting this person is 110K, this person's 80K, then just to get the AI to replace those jobs, I got a 20 to 40K cost cut. Let me just go ahead and replace them, and we'll have the manager oversee the AI role. But then a younger entrepreneur or a younger CEO is like, I've already built out a lot of this stuff with AI. I know how to use AI to the point where I've built an agent or something like that has already replaced that role. So I don't even need to think about, oh, what is it costing me or what does it look like? Because a lot of the times that these young entrepreneurs, going back to what we were saying earlier, they're looking for a way to get it started at whatever perspective, whatever monetary amount that they have to them. And a lot of that is a lot cheaper than building out a board, building out advisors, and all these other things that bigger businesses or older businesses had to do in order to be successful. Everything is there. So again, it's give and take, in my opinion. It's good because I feel like it helps you get to answers faster than you would have beyond what a Google search would have gave you before. especially if you're looking for something specifically. And then to the point where it was able to build out models and everything else, and it just keeps getting better and better as the more people use it and train it. So it to an extent will become a really great and useful tool, but at the same time, we just need to make sure that you're being very mindful. But that's all the topics that we have today. Um, we'll be dropping on all the platforms per usual. Check us out on YouTube and on our podcast channels. Just be aware, pay attention to market, pay attention to the student loans announcements and everything else from the Department of Education. Just stay on alert. There's a lot of things that have been announced. Always keep your head on a swivel, essentially, with all this news that's coming out. I think there's something every week, either about AI, the job market, interest rates, student loans, just current trends and everything else. It can get lost in it, so just pay attention, stay focused, tune into our podcast, and help you get some of those answers potentially. Hopefully, that's what we're hoping to do. So we'll catch you guys all next time. We appreciate it. See you.